afternoon, and thank you again for joining us today. Welcome to the Integrating Juvenile Justice with System of Care webinar. This is Denise Solzbach. I'm one of the two co-deputy directors of the TA Network for Children's Behavioral Health. We are the Technical Assistance Center funded by SAMHSA to support System of Care grants. Today's webinar was planned to align with SAMHSA's System of Care expansion and sustainability requests for applications. These System of Care grants are 4-year awards with a maximum award of $1 million per year for political subdivisions of states, meaning counties, as well as tribes, tribal organizations, or territories, and up to $3 million per year for states. Applications are due April 10th. There's a link to the RFA at the end of this presentation. This webinar is also intended to provide participants with an example of how juvenile justice and System of Care has been successfully integrated in one community from both a state and local perspective, as well as encourage participants to submit System of Care applications with juvenile justice focus. Now, there are a lot of you on the line right now, and so therefore, we're going to keep all lines muted. We will have the opportunity for questions at the end. We're going to ask you to use your chat box function to send questions that will be answered at the end of the webinar. For those of you participating by phone or playing the recorded webinar, contact information for presenters is provided at the end of the presentation. The presenters today are Erin Espinoza. She currently serves as the primary implementation lead for the Texas System of Care and is a research associate with the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health in the School of Social Work at the University of Texas at Austin. She has worked on several implementation and evaluation efforts designed to enhance services for children and adolescents with mental health needs with a focus on juvenile justice. Prior to joining the Institute, Erin served as co-lead for Texas's Mental Health and Juvenile Justice Action Network. Her previous efforts include those associated with the development and implementation of the front-end diversion initiatives, FEDI, through the Mental Health Juvenile Justice Action Network, coordinated by the National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice, and funded by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. She currently serves as a key collaborator for the Mental Health and Juvenile Justice Collaborative for Change and is a consultant with the TA Network. Roger Martinez is the Chief Juvenile Probation Officer in the County of El Paso, Texas. Roger began his career in juvenile justice in 1992 at the El Paso County Juvenile Probation Department, where he served as a juvenile probation officer until 1994, when he became the department's Title IV-E coordinator. He was promoted to Director of Probation Services, where he served for a period of 5 years. In 2000, Roger was transferred to the Border Children's Mental Health Collaborative. That was the county's then-funded System of Care grant at the request of the Chief Juvenile Probation Officer and El Paso County Judge. Under the collaborative, Roger took the helm of their System of Care effort and moved it into a successfully sustained System of Care. And finally, Tegan Henke is the State Development Specialist for Texas System of Care. In this role, she coordinates with state agencies, local communities, and community members to shape the policies that will sustain and support the System of Care framework across the state of Texas. Previously, Tegan worked with the Children's Mental Health Team and State Department Health Services, where she was a leader in the redesign of Children's Mental Health Service Delivery System in Texas. Tegan has her master's in couple and family therapy and also spent several years working as a crisis counselor for children, youth, and their families. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Erin.
Thank you, Denise. Well, welcome, everybody. I would say good afternoon from Texas, but I just saw somebody log in and say it's morning still in Alaska. Like, I don't even understand that concept. But thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And yeah, before we get going, I kind of wanted to say thank you to the Innovations Institute and the University of Maryland and Michelle Zabel and Denise and all of the bunch over there for bringing this concept together and allowing us to have this conversation today. It's really been an exciting journey for sure. And so when we were looking at how to put this information together, you know, what do we want to really do with this kind of a concept? One of the things that drove the work was the efforts behind two policy briefs that I think will be coming out through the TA network here in the near future. The first of which is integrating juvenile justice and mental health and system of care, why we should do that, why should we engage the juvenile justice system, and then the second is how do we do that. So it's nice to have the conversation around, why, but, what do we practically do, and, how can we make it effective? And again, those two briefs will be coming out in the very near future, but kind of laid the framework for our conversation this afternoon, or as I said earlier, morning, as it is in Alaska. And so when we put this agenda together, I really wanted to drill down and have some practical conversation on, not only what does the research say, what are the national trends, what's happening out there, but, talk to some people who are actually doing the work. And so that's what we brought in Roger Martinez, you'll get to hear from after I'm done chatting it up for a bit. And he can talk about the story of El Paso. And then bringing up the end of this conversation will be Tegan, as Denise said, to kind of talk about, how can you look at potentially integrating juvenile justice into a system of care from a statewide perspective. And, in our state, we kind of like to do things from the top down, bottom up, sideways approach, and that's kind of how we wanted to come at this talk today. So with all that being said, why don't we just kind of dig right in? So that's a little bit about us. So, what is the issue? What are we looking at when we talk about juvenile justice and mental health? And what we know is that the rate of the amount of actually psychiatric disorders among kids in the juvenile justice system is much higher than the rate in the community, with some studies showing a range of anywhere from 50 to 100% of youth involved in the juvenile justice system having some kind of mental health challenge, with 20 to 25% of those kids having a severe emotional disturbance. And just to kind of break it down to you, when you compare that to the general population of youth across the country, the rate really ranges around 9 to 25%. So there is definitely a higher prevalence, or some would say a disproportionate representation of youth with mental health needs in the system. And the reason why there's these variances of the amounts or the rates, as you say, of mental health disorders in the system is because all these studies are done at different points. So some of these studies are done with kids in detention, some are with kids incarcerated, and some with kids in the community. So you would expect those rates to really vary. So what we also have seen is that there has been some research that's begun to show or establish that youth may be funneled into the juvenile justice system as a way to access mental health care. So what you'll see there is that there was a survey commissioned by Representative Waxman back in 2003 and 2004 of all the juvenile detention centers across the country. In that survey, what they found was that 2/3 of detention centers across the country reported actually placing kids in detention or holding them in detention because they were pending mental health treatment and not necessarily just because they were committing violent offenses. There was also a survey conducted by the National Alliance on Mental Illness that found that 36% of the families that they actually spoke to admitted or said, hey, we had to have our kid arrested or detained because they needed mental health care, and that was actually a better choice for my family than actually doing what they had as an alternative offer, which was potentially relinquishing the child welfare. So we drilled down a little further. We conducted some focus groups a couple of years ago here in Texas, talking to some folks that were involved with both systems, and really got some practical stories from them. And it was pretty heartbreaking. There was actually one lady that I spoke to in Lubbock who talked about the fact that she was trying to get her master's in social work and become a licensed master's level social worker. And she had adopted a young fellow from the Ukraine, and the kid had a lot of disorders, a lot of problems, pretty aggressive behavior, and it got pretty dangerous in her home. And she didn't want to relinquish him. But the choice was she either had to get him out of the house because her insurance had been tapped. There was no more money associated for psych hospitalization, and she didn't know where to go for help. So she reached out to the local juvenile probation simply because she felt if she had her son arrested, then at least she could get him help and not, in turn, also be charged with a crime herself. Because in our state, it's actually a Class B misdemeanor, in some places a Class A misdemeanor, if you have to turn your children into child welfare. So she wouldn't be able to practice as a licensed social worker, nor have her son home with her if JJ wasn't involved. So the last little study I want to talk about was the U.S. General Accounting Office that actually said that about, at any given time, 13,000 youth in the juvenile justice system were referred because the families were trying to access mental health care. So there's really, no question that when families are looking for help, they don't want to relinquish their kids. They don't want to get them arrested. I mean, we all want kids to be successful, but sometimes, kids get in trouble with the law, and so, there has to be a system to hold them accountable for that and to help them through that process. But the interesting thing is that in the juvenile justice system, similar to the adult criminal justice system, kids with mental health needs, especially those kids with those severe challenges, actually struggle within that system. So most youth arrested are processed by a local juvenile court. Well, and part of that process typically includes them being mandated to supervision of some sort and or mandated to treatment of some sort. So what we have seen in our research here at the Institute is that it's actually been proven that kids with mental health challenges are less likely to be successful under supervision. They are more likely to be violated because they fail to attend treatment or don't get better, or are violated for other behaviors not necessarily associated with new crimes, but just the failure to follow that court order. And then we also have started to see some research coming out about this phenomenon known as the treater-turned-monitor syndrome. And basically what that is that when you have a youth and family involved with the criminal justice system, if they're already involved with a mental health caseworker or case manager, research has begun to show that what tends to happen with those types of kids and families is that case manager or treater turns into a quasi-monitor. So instead of engaging with empathetic approaches towards treatment, they then in turn turn to turning the kid or family in to the PO for a lack of compliance. And so essentially you end up with dual supervision. So there's this worst case scenario set up for them. What we also know is that the outcomes for kids in the mental health system are much, much worse than those without mental health challenges. So in several studies done across the country, we've seen the rearrest rates for kids who come back from residential treatment centers or incarceration settings as high as 40% or as low as 40% to as high as 85%. So these kids coming back aren't successful when they come in the community and they're being rearrested at extremely high rates. We also know that just the pure nature of being involved in a juvenile justice system can exacerbate the mental health symptoms of kids, primarily around children with trauma histories. So some recent research that we have published in the journal Criminal Justice and Behavior actually showed that the strongest predictor of where kids go in our juvenile justice system is a positive endorsement on the traumatic experiences scale on our mental health screening instrument, which basically tells us that when kids are acting out or coping with the system interaction and their trauma history, it increases the likelihood of them having sanctions placed on them because we don't know what to do. So the youth reactions to traumatic pasts result in those behaviors that create those additional sanctions and actually cause kids to fail up, if you will, into more secure settings. So all of this has led to this recent research that's been being published on adolescent development. It really underscored the important behavior differences between adults and adolescents, especially when you look at the direct design and operation of the juvenile justice system. So it's raised some doubts for folks across the country, from agencies such as the Annie Casey Foundation to John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur and the Models for Change movement. All these folks have been having these conversations nationally about what are we doing? How are we looking at kids and behaviors through a developmental approach? So what the result was is that the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention actually asked the National Research Council to convene a committee to conduct a study of juvenile justice reform. And what that committee found was that we really need to look at changing the juvenile justice system towards a developmental approach. So what you see there in front of you is the result of that study. And so the National Research Council basically said we need to really look at these 7 hallmarks in the developmental approach that have to be looked at within the system. So the first is, how can we hold youth accountable for some of the criminogenic issues that they're getting involved in without making them criminals? Are there alternatives to juvenile justice involvement? Are there ways to divert some of these kids into other systems or other service arrays? And we really need to look at individualizing their responses, the system responses, based on that individual kid's need and risk, and only confine them when it's necessary because of public safety and not just because they've been running away from home or skipping school. Really look at a genuine commitment to fairness. So how do we process kids through a juvenile justice system that actually looks at where they are developmentally? So how can we distinguish the way the system responds between a 10-year-old kid and a 16 to 17-year-old youth? And then that adds to the sensitivity to the disparate treatment. So if we know that we have youth primarily of color, they're in confinement, then we also have youth primarily with strong or intense mental health needs in confinement, then how can we more equalize the treatment approach across the system and the service array? And then lastly, of course, is family engagement. So what you'll see, if you look at all 7 of these tenets of a developmental approach to juvenile justice reform, they fit very nicely aligned with the core competencies and necessary drivers for a system of care. So how do you do that? If we're going to talk about all of this, we've really built the case that, we know kids are served better at home, right? They have to be at home to get better. You know what? Even if you place them out of the home because they have committed a severe offense and they go to a RTC or a youth prison, they have to come back. And we know them coming back, they're not very successful either. And we know that being involved in the system can actually make their development delayed, can actually harm the kids more than help them. So what? So what does that matter if we can't do anything about it? So the second half of my talk, I want to talk about a little bit around, kind of some things that you can do. So the first is you need to build a sustained leadership. And I start out with this thought of the juvenile justice system needs to be no less than an equal partner. So a lot of times what we see across the country and in our state as well is that as communities go towards, and states go towards applying for system of care grants or really try to work towards a system of care modality, they tend to get letters of support from juvenile justice. They might even have them at the table, but they haven't got them to commit actual judicial leadership like judges and prosecutors and even defense attorneys to the dialogue. They don't really bring the wins of system of care back to JJ, like to really prove to them that working and investing in the community through funding and other supports is going to be good to their system. And they don't look at really leveraging resources for shared outcomes. So, how can you reroute residential dollars to the community to try to keep those kids at home and show the value of that through the system of care modality back to the court system? So some models that have been developed through the national effort that started kind of with the adult world is this sequential intercept model. So this is one approach that you guys can take a look at as a way to think about diversion strategies or reintegration strategies through a system of care. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go to the Gain Center website, which the link is at the bottom of that PowerPoint slide. So what you see there essentially is that there's 6 different key intercepts where youth or even adults who have mental health needs can be diverted from the system. The first is at the law enforcement level, and so this is really when the kid is first made contact with the police officer. So your school resource officers or your truancy courts are a good place to start with that. The second would be intake, and the definition of that is basically at the point when a kid comes to the juvenile justice system, either through a detention and they're arrested and brought into detention, or some kind of a referral where they actually have to talk to a juvenile probation officer. The third would be detention in that they actually have to hold them overnight. So kids who have to be seen by the court because their offense is so severe or the needs of the family are such that they have to be locked up. Judicial processing refers to when they're actually going to be going through an adjudication and disposition system. So here's where you see a lot of your specialty courts come in. So mental health courts and drug courts are usually held at this intercept point. And then disposition, so when they actually decide whether the youth has to be placed on some kind of community-based supervision or removed from the home. And then lastly, of course, is reentry. So when kids come back from RTCs or youth prison systems, are there ways to coordinate services to keep them successful in the community? So some things that you guys can consider if you want to integrate juvenile justice into a system of care is, what can be done within the juvenile justice system processing to help identify and connect kids to services. The first piece would be screening. So most youth who are screened for mental health needs are usually screened within the juvenile justice system after adjudication or placement. So they're already at those deep in intercept points. So one of the first things that the National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice recommended was that you should move those screenings from post-adjudication to pre, so at intake or pre-court if possible. In our state, we actually initiated intake-based screening back in 2001 and have seen it be very successful at helping us to connect kids and divert them before the court process even has to be embarked on. Another thing you can look at doing is screening at intake for Medicaid eligibility. So we conducted a study about 5 years ago where I actually looked at every youth referred across the entire state of Texas and got their financial data to see if they would meet Medicaid eligibility. The shocking thing for me was that over 62% of the kids who were brought into the juvenile justice system in Texas actually met the income limits for Medicaid. But of those 62% of the kids, less than 50% were even enrolled in Medicaid. So about half the youth that were coming in the front door of the Texas juvenile justice system should have been on Medicaid or could have been on Medicaid and never had an application filed. So we initiated a policy within some of our local probation departments whereby the probation officers at intake would actually start the Medicaid process for those kids if they identified that they could qualify. So the second key thing that you can look at doing is actually doing some data matching. So nationally what we've seen is that a lot of juvenile justice agencies have the ability to identify kids who were on Medicaid after they come into their system, but don't necessarily have any information on when they were accessing public mental health care. So one of the things that has been suggested by both the National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice as well as some efforts in our state is that, juvenile justice and mental health could come to the table and match data. So one of the things that we have in our state is that we actually look at every kid who comes into the juvenile justice system and have the ability to cross-match those youth to the public mental health system. The thought is that at detention or at intake, you could possibly divert kids back into mental health care if they're already receiving it, or at least inform the court process that they're in treatment as you go forward and early on. So nationally, there was some work being done around the entire Models for Change juvenile justice reform. So back in 2007, it's weird to say back in 2007, I just now realized that was almost 8 years ago, right? 8 years ago. Back in 2007, the Mental Health and Juvenile Justice Action Network was formed. Basically it was framed as a tenet of the Models for Change juvenile justice reform efforts. It was coordinated by the National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice and really focused on specific issues. They wanted to look at the development of some policy and process approaches that could be used across different communities, across several states. And on this slide, you can also get more information. The primary effort of that action network was divided into two pieces. The first was, of course, front-end diversion. So how can you look at kids at that intake level and that detention level and really divert them from the system? Intake, detention, and law enforcement. So those first touches of the system. And then the second was workforce development. So within the front-end diversion, there were 3 models that were designed. The first was a school-based diversion model that was based upon the Wraparound Milwaukee's Mobile Urgent Treatment Team model, or MUT model, which always makes me laugh a little when I say it, but it's the MUT model. And then the second was a law enforcement-based diversion strategy that built upon some crisis intervention team training that was developed by Colorado Regional Community Policing Institute. Essentially what they did is they took the crisis intervention team model training curriculum and added an 8-hour module for youth. So essentially police officers who are already becoming trained or certified in that model would also be able to get special training and support around working with youth. And then the third model that was developed was a probation-based diversion strategy that we actually did here in Texas that Denise alluded to earlier, the front-end diversion initiative. And essentially what we did with that was we put together specialized training and coaching for probation officers who carried reduced caseloads and worked with youth pre-adjudication for up to 6 months to serve as basically a court-based case manager to tie them into services and divert them from the system. And then that second piece with the Mental Health and Juvenile Justice Action Network was a workforce development piece where the National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice worked with several national subject matter experts to develop an 8-hour training that was designed to provide a variety of supports and tools for anyone who worked within the juvenile justice system. And you can learn more about that also at the MHJJ website. What's really cool about that is that's gotten a lot of traction, and at this point I think they've trained thousands of frontline staff and workers throughout the country in modules. Now all of this is rolled into something that's now called the Collaborative for Change. So the Collaborative for Change is coordinated by the Mental Health and Juvenile Justice, National Center for Mental Health and Juvenile Justice. It basically was designed to take the lessons learned from the Models for Change effort and create a collaborative so that those continued technical assistance approaches could be applied across the country. And again, you can access more about that collaborative there with that link. So that's pretty much all for my part of it. It's a lot of information. There's a lot that I covered. It's weird to talk without being able to see people, but you can learn more about all the different nuances of the whys and hows when those policy briefs come out within the next couple of weeks. So with all that being said, Roger, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Erin. I appreciate that. Welcome, I guess, to virtual El Paso at this point in the El Paso experience. As you can see right in front, that's our wonderful building that our county commissioners and our juvenile board were able to provide funding for, to have a state-of-the-art facility to provide fantastic services that are being rendered by staff, volunteers, and just all types of community members that we've bridged across all kinds of boundaries to have the best services for kids. But let me take you back to September 30th, 2003. And it'll allude to the power of the pen, from Probation Services Director to Board of Children's Mental Health Collaborative Director. September 30th, 2003, we were notified here in El Paso County that we were the recipients of $9.5 million grant for systems of care. It was like winning the lotto that day. We were so excited. We have all this money coming in, but we had to understand that came with a cash match and in-kind match along with it. During the time that we were doing this, we had some very, very astute individuals that were leading the helm of this whole project. But it fell, unfortunately, into a situation that wasn't so positive when it came to issues of evaluation, which I think now in hindsight, I look back, that was probably the best learning tool for me as I push forward here with my staff here and look at all the things that we do here with evaluation within our own department. But I digress back to 2007. Back in 2007, or rather 2006, things had become so much of a disarray that we were asked to possibly return all the money that we had been provided by SAMHSA, or that we would be taken away from us. So we had to we went to a meeting along with the late and I call him great Commissioner Dan Haggerty, who attended this meeting with us in Atlanta, and we were placed in a room and we're told to make some sort of a decision on how we wanted to proceed with this grant. We did ask for another chance, possible do-over, and Dr. Gary Blau did give us that opportunity. Upon coming back to El Paso, and asking for this with all the other stakeholders in the community with this project, I was then approached and told by the power of the pen that I was going to be moving from Director of Probation Services, where I was in my nice corner office at the probation department, running my unit like I thought I was supposed to be running it, and placed at the 9th floor of the Child Protective Services building in downtown El Paso with a secretary and myself. So there the story begins. We were able and had to come together to educate the community and bring the community together as to what we were doing here. The whole purpose of the grant was to keep children in El Paso County because we did not have a residential treatment center here in our county, and we had many children that were being sent out of town. In 2007, juvenile probation alone here at our department placed 64 children in out-of-town residential treatment centers that went close to $1.7 million worth of funding to provide that. I can very, very proudly tell you today, year to date, we've only placed 14 youth in residential placement. But during the time that we had to bring the community together, again, the late Commissioner Haggerty opened many, many doors for us. He said, I'm not quite sure I understand how this works, and I was trying to make sense of it myself and how it worked as well, and began to realize the need of services that we needed to provide for families and youth, and understand the dynamics of what was going on with these families and these youth in their homes and the services maybe that were not being provided or where they were not being included in service plans and being pretty much told what to do. I tell people that when this first happened, I felt I was thrown under the bus, then thought I was really on a journey, and when it came right down to it, I was truly on a sabbatical because there was going to be many things I was going to have to learn, things that I was going to have to come to terms with in my own thought process and be stretched like I've never been stretched before in a professional and personal manner in regards to these types of issues. We ended up being able to go from door to door, from the University of Texas at El Paso to El Paso Community College to every major school district to begin to engage the community in this process. From the Mental Health Authority to Child Protective Services to Juvenile Justice, and created all the alliances and allies. But what I did have to do, and I had to understand, which was one of my learning curves, and it was a fantastic learning curve, was I had to learn how to speak the languages of Child Protective Services, learn the language of the independent school districts, learn the language of mental health, and I began to feel what a lot of our families are feeling like as they navigated through systems. I wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I wasn't the dullest either, but it became somewhat difficult. In order to begin the engagement of individuals in different agencies in regards to this process, I had to learn their tasks and I had to learn their mandates and what it was going to do for them as an agency to fulfill what we're trying to get accomplished with our families. I can equate this very much like if you're touring through Europe. You go to Portugal, you go to Spain, you go to France. Yes, they're all interconnected in one way or another, but they all have their different languages, cultures, customs, things of that nature. And so it took me through that type of a route of sorts. We had to learn about wraparound, what wraparound was and what it was going to do in the whole process for wraparound. Once we began to come together as a community, understand wraparound, began to keep kids local, began to use systems of care, began to understand that we could work closely together and do things for kids and families to keep them local. It was time to show SAMHSA and the rest of the United States that we had come together from what we call from the ashes to the phoenix rising. We created a human wraparound chain around the county courthouse on May 8th, 2007. That was the beginnings of what I would consider the reform of children's mental health in El Paso and the way we did things more collaboratively here in the county of El Paso. That day we came together as a community, as agencies, as families, with children to make things happen and show that this is going to be successful and move forward. On that day, if you have an opportunity, we do have a website on the Juvenile Probation, El Paso County Juvenile Probation website with videos that show all the happenings that occurred during that time frame. So what we noticed that we needed to have was who was around the table. What was needed around the table was the power of the robe, the judicial sponsorship and judicial input and buy-in by the judges. We have an amazing judge on the bench, Judge Adolescent Gutierrez, along with two juvenile court referees, Judge Richard Ainsa and Terry Ligon. And they have truly, truly bought into the practices we have here. I digress back to 2007. We go to New Orleans to go talk to Dr. Blau to show him and all the others at SAMHSA what we have done as a community. At that time, we asked if we can still keep this grant going, keep it running. He says, not only can you keep this, what other assistance can we do to help you out with this, which is amazing. We were very, very excited about that. Commissioner Haggerty, again, he stretches me even more, says, okay, this is going to become a county department, and we're going to need to have a building along with this. Through the assistance of Harris County and their Youth Service Center, we're able to get all their plans and schematics and blueprints that were needed to give a concept and idea to bring to the Commissioner's Court Hence, to make a long story short, the El Paso County Commissioners Court did fund initial $10 million to create the project, and it stands right here next to the Juvenile Justice Center to work in the systems of care as far as working with our gang population, our mental health population, our diversion population, and so forth and so on. We were very pleased with that. The possibility of me becoming chief of the department came into play after this occurred. I was somewhat torn initially about this because I felt like I needed to continue my work there, but it was my life goal was to be able to do and make a difference here at this department. So I moved forward and applied for the position here, and so almost 6 years ago, June 1st, 6 years ago, I was given the privilege to come to the helm of this department. With that, I realized that everything I learned through systems of care and collaboration and building bridges and making difference in children and family lives was going to be blended and incorporated here at this department. I was blessed to see that I had very, very dedicated staff members here. They had always been here. They had the dedication, they had the knowledge base, they had the compassion to push forward and pull forward and make these things happen here at the department. We began to look at strategic planning within the department. It was a little bit difficult on the onset, but that was something we learned at the collaborative through systems of care, was strategic planning and logic models. We began to incorporate that, and I had a very strong deputy chief here that was very in tune with that, and he took the lead on that. We had other individuals that were very strong with evidence-based practices and promising practices. We brought them to step up to the plate, and they took a swing and have hit grand slams all the way through. We then were able to work with evaluation with the local university here at UTEP to bring in evaluators that work, that are in the School of Psychology, in the master's program working on their theses, and some of the PhD students working on their dissertations that have incorporated evaluation into some of the processes that we're doing here. So you can see these key factors that happen at the systems of care through that journey were brought over into the juvenile justice system to continue the work here. Some of the things that we did look at, as Aaron mentioned earlier, was the actual need for assessing very, very early, when the child walks into that door with that parent. We've been using that assessment tool now for the last 5 years, and it's been fantastic. We've been able to divert about 49% of our youth from the formal court process, provide them the types of services that are needed, whether it be through our department or through the community, and then have them lead wonderful lives that they should be leading as young adults and children. Those that have not been able to do that, we've had to move forward into the court system, and we've had different types of courts and different programs that have been available for them. One thing that we did do was train all of our staff in motivational interviewing. So all our corrections staff, all our detention staff, all our probation officers, supervisors are all trained in motivational interviewing and maintain that skill set on a yearly basis with recordings and tapes to make sure that we're continuing that process. Along with that, one of our directors, Director of Probation Services, along with some of her staff, created a criminogenics matrix in order for them to assist us in how we're going to have children be placed in the appropriate programs, of course, along with the input of that family member that was coming into place as well. We looked at targeted interventions and specifics as to what we're going to be doing with those kids that did show some of these things. Again, working with the intensive supervised probation child, working with the serious habitual offender with our gang population, working with our drug courts, working with our special needs diversion courts, and actually implementing a mental health diversion court in conjunction with the University of Texas at El Paso pre-law program, which has been working extremely well thus far. As far as looking at community collaborations, as I mentioned earlier, we did collaborate with quite a number of different entities through the systems of care, but just a few to let you know of now. Our partners in collaboration are Mental Health Support Services, which is our systems of care grant that went to become a county department. With the Emergence Health Network, Texas Tech Psychiatry Department, where we have psychiatric fellows that are coming through our department and assisting us with psychiatric evaluations, medication management. We've worked with the Emmanuel Project with the arts, where they've trained our teachers to incorporate the arts into the core curriculum of study. We have the Girl Scout program. We have JPD Fit. JPD Fit is FBI agents and sheriff's deputies, Homeland Security and Border Protection that have stepped up to the plate to mentor some of our young men in the drug court by taking them to go work out with a gym that was provided free of cost. So we're finishing the first year of that, and studies being done on that to see how that's worked there. Communities and schools, all the independent school districts, municipal courts, justices of the peace, all law enforcement agencies. And the list goes on. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we have close to 135 contracts and interlocal agreements within the department as well. We look at evaluation and to see what has occurred with evaluation. We're part of an evaluation, the Closer to Home study, and I'm not sure if many of you have seen that, but it is now, it's been published, it's been launched here in Texas, and I believe it's already been launched at the national level. And they did, El Paso County is one of the counties they studied in regards to recidivism on youth that were eligible to be placed in correctional institutions at the state level, but were kept closer to home and provided with services. This study happened to coincide at the same time that we were able to begin a lot of the processes that we have here within our department and the programs we have here. So it was a very good measurement to show where we were at before to where we're at now. We looked at our recidivism rate 5 years ago at 46% for that particular population. We then came in under the level of recidivism with that population to 28% within a 5-year period of time, which established that Tier 1 status. We're really pleased with that because we're pleased that the families and the youth are getting the services that they need and maintaining and keeping the children close to home. But I attribute that to the systems of care philosophy that we've incorporated here at the department with our staff, and then, of course, going into working with our families and our youth here at the Juvenile Justice Center. One of the examples I can give you is our Challenge Academy Explorers. This is a form of the Boy Scouts that are part of our post-adjudication program. You can see them in this photo here. They're working with staff members and other youth that are there and building a float that's going to be they're going to participate in the Thanksgiving Day Parade this past Thanksgiving. They worked very hard along the side of their parents, along their counselors, with some of our maintenance crew. The whole department rallied behind these youth and creating fundraisers, and I don't know how many bowls of nachos I bought to help sustain this and provide funding and help out with this, but they did an amazing job together, working together and showing how they could work together on this. The next area you're going to look at here is their completion of that as they take that in front of our building at the Juvenile Justice Center on the way to go to the parade route. Years past, we were taking vans of kids past that same area to our local prison and jails to give them scared straight tours, which we no longer do. We are now taking them to the university for tours. We're taking them to El Paso Community College, to vocational programs, things that we're going to show that their future is going to be much brighter. Hence, just like this float as it's leaving the department, where we're going to highlight and show the works of the kids and what a great job they've done there. We look down here and you see them marching down Montana Avenue, which is one of the big main streets here in El Paso County. We roughly have about 250,000 people that line the streets of El Paso, Montana Street for that parade, along with it being televised. A lot of these young men and women never even had been to the parade, much as there was a parade, but this time they were participating. If you look behind there, you see some of them dressed up in the Angry Birds costume. Now, the Angry Birds came into play not because they're angry, but the theme of the parade was video games. And the youth chose this along with the art teachers to move forward with something as such. And as you see them marching across, what you would consider kids that would never have been part of this parade, never would have participated, much as even go, are marching so proudly, wearing these costumes where in the past were in their gang colors and doing things that were not as marching in a parade. And it was even a much more special treat when we found out that they won the Governor's Award that year for the parade. And they were so excited. portions of that float sit in our art gallery that we have here that was started when we had the Emmanuel Project come through here. So we celebrate the success. And I've learned more and more to celebrate the successes of all the youth that are coming through our programs, whether they're in a diversion program where they are graduating from, some of the I guess, lesser type of sanction type programs that we have available there, or they're going through strengthening families and graduating as a family and coming together to receive their certificates and baskets with popcorn goodies and blankets that can have their family night together rather than coming to strengthening families and incorporate that in their home, to celebrating the cadets when they graduate in the gym with a very large ceremony and watching them be reintegrated back with their parents and their families. So, I tell you all this because all this has evolved because of the implementation of the whole Systems of Care grant years ago. We did have to take a fall to rise, but we have risen well. And not us as a department, but us as a department for the youth and families that we serve. And that's the ultimate thing that we're looking at. With that here, I am going to give this over to Tegan. Tegan?
All right, thank you, Roger. Okay, so I am going to talk a little bit about what we have done in Texas. And so we have, in the state of Texas, we have a statewide system of care implementation grant. And so one of the things that we wanted to do as part of that grant was to do a policy academy. And so we actually selected mental health and juvenile justice. We wanted to facilitate some partnerships in communities between those agencies. And so we went the policy academy route. We had learned some lessons around policy academies from our state agencies who had participated in the Models for Change Action Network, and really wanted to do an in-state version of a policy academy. So thus was born the Texas Mental Health and Juvenile Justice Policy Academy. So we had a competitive selection and selected 3 sites across the state. One of the criteria that we put in place was that each community that was applying had to have partners from both their mental health authorities and their juvenile probation departments. And that was one of the non-negotiables. And then they submitted applications that just showed what the need was in their community and some ideas about what they wanted to do to improve the collaboration in their communities. So after those communities were selected, we had some homework. So we were going to collect everybody in Austin, Texas for a kickoff conference. But prior to that, we wanted to get to know the communities a little bit more. So Aaron had mentioned a little bit earlier the Sequential Intercept model. And so we gave each of our communities some homework on the Sequential Intercept model, asked them to read up on it, and had some calls with each of them so that we could walk through what their proposals looked like, get a little bit better idea of what they were hoping to do in their communities, and talk about their current level of collaboration and what that looked like. At the local kickoff conference in Austin, we had some national and local subject matter experts whose main role was just to provide some information about what was currently happening in the state of Texas and across the country in terms of mental health and juvenile justice collaborations. So some of our national experts that came in were talking about the implementation of evidence-based practices across mental health and juvenile justice settings, cross-agency communication and collaboration, and then where policy meets practice. So what does this look like practically speaking, and how do you implement it into a local system? We had some local experts coming in as well. So Roger was one of those, and I will say that he is a sharp knife in the drawer, despite what he claims. So we were happy to have Roger there, and a couple other folks from the state. One thing that I want to mention is that we did include a local judge on as part of our local experts, because we wanted to, as Roger put it quite well, use the power of the rope. So we wanted to really highlight judicial involvement and the benefits of judicial involvement, not just at the local level, but how that can have a broader impact. So it was really exciting. We had our state partners at this kickoff conference as well, so our state agency folks got to hear what's happening across the country and really got to dive in and see what our local communities are doing. So it was an exciting day. Another part of the kickoff conference was to facilitate work plans. So we worked individually with each community to develop a plan that they then took back to their communities to implement. So then following that kickoff conference, we went straight for implementation. The communities went back. They had calls with us here at the Texas Institute for Excellence in Mental Health, and we were able to connect them with national subject matter experts as they needed them, and really just provided some of that feedback and an outside entity to provide some ideas off of as they were implementing their plans. So you can see we laid out our purpose for the MHJJ Policy Academy, and I'll say there were some really lofty goals. Of course, to strengthen and develop local partnerships between mental health and juvenile justice, testing and implementing strategies and interventions, and then reducing the use of unnecessary detention and placing kids outside of the community. So what we discovered was really that where we needed to start was just that first bullet, developing and strengthening local partnerships. I think if we continue with the Policy Academy model, we'll be able to eventually implement some interventions, but we really needed to work on those collaborations, and I'll get into that in a little bit more in just a minute. So some of our communities, when they were going through that work plan facilitation, some of their goals, they really recognized what their communities needed, and so one of the first things they said was really just educating their communities on the mental health needs of juvenile justice-involved youth, and then what resources are there in the community. So even within the group of kind of local experts, so they're the people who really have a pulse in their communities on what's going on, really wanted to consolidate what resources they have available in their communities. And then identifying and removing barriers to service, improving cross-system communication and collaboration. Implementing data and information sharing systems really came up quite a bit with all of our communities. And that one again was really difficult without having that collaboration and communication really firmly established. And then again, our communities really wanted to implement an intervention and really do something tangible in their communities. I'm going to tell you a little bit about one of the communities that we worked with, just to illustrate what the real need for having juvenile justice, as Aaron put it, no less than an equal partner, and some really great things that can happen. So one of the counties or communities that participated was from an urban county, and they were are a graduated system of care community. So we were really excited when they applied and were selected because they have done some really great things in their community and had remained connected in terms of identifying as a system of care community and continuing to build on the things that worked when they were still funded with system of care dollars. So really we felt like they had the infrastructure in place for collaboration. One of the things that they wanted to do was to survey their direct service staff in both mental health and juvenile justice to find out about the communication and collaboration, because their leadership team really suspected that it wasn't as strong as they might have hoped or as they would have thought, having been a system of care community. So we sent out a survey, and what we found, you'll see in the bullets there, the direct service staff from both systems felt that the system as a whole was uncoordinated. So while they said they identified, having good communication kind of on a one-to-one level with a mental health worker and a juvenile probation worker, they didn't necessarily feel like the system supported that type of collaboration. Many of the mental health providers don't understand the juvenile justice system and processes. And as a former mental health person, I can see where this one comes in, because I think I still sometimes have trouble wrapping my head around the juvenile justice system and terminology and all those sorts of things. So we found that to be true. And also that mental health providers didn't feel that their opinions were respected by the juvenile justice staff. One of the things that we want to do, particularly around this one, is dig a little bit deeper and look at some more systemic issues, because we're wondering if it's not so much that their opinions aren't respected by juvenile justice staff, but that neither really know where philosophically mental health and the mental health approach to treatment and care fits with the juvenile justice approach to care. So kind of following the title of this webinar, Merging Care with Control. So we really want to dig into that, maybe with some focus groups, and kind of find out a little bit more information. The other thing that we wanted to look into, and this lines up with the new developmental approach that's coming out and related to family engagement, is look a little bit more at some of the systemic issues that are related to family engagement. So some of the feedback that we got back from the survey from both workers was that there was some limited follow-through from families accessing mental health treatment. Mm-hmm. So we're wondering, and some of the reasons that were cited were a lack of transportation, really long waiting lists, a lack of availability of culture-specific or language-specific treatments or therapists. And so we want to look into some of those systemic issues and maybe do some family focus groups and see how much of that is related to some of those systemic issues and how much of it is a challenge with engagement and how we engage families within a system of care and across agencies. So some of the lessons that we learned through this Policy Academy experience, I will say that it was a really great experience for both the local communities and us as the system of care, as a grantee for the system of care. And one of the things that we definitely learned was that we need to focus on the strong collaborations and equal partnerships between mental health and juvenile justice. So this is, really the leadership from both agencies within communities. Even within the three communities on our Policy Academy, the communities that had a stronger juvenile justice role or who were led by the juvenile probation department had a much easier time moving things along and pushing things through. So, and I think that to me, that seems to go along with that idea that the juvenile justice process sort of leads things in terms of the mental health treatment and the mental health care. So we have to figure out where mental health can fit in with that juvenile justice process. So focusing on those equal partnerships was really important. And then really a clear understanding of the community needs and resources. So every single one of our communities really wanted to come up with an overall resource list for their entire service area. So we know, I was a social worker, so I know how outdated those lists get, and pretty quickly. So even just finding a way to keep up with all of the new services and the information that's out there was really important in maintaining that foundation and that collaboration. And then, of course, clear communication strategies at all levels. And so this is the part where, you want mental health and juvenile justice at the direct service level to be able to know how to work well together, and at the administrative level, working really well. So communication across systems, but also top to bottom. So like Erin said, we approach things up, down, sideways in Texas, but I think the communication and collaboration follows a similar pattern here. In that direct service staff need to be able to provide feedback to the administrative level to help ensure that the system can support that level of collaboration that needs to be done for kids and families at the direct service level. So those are some of the lessons that we've learned, and it was a really great experience, and we're hoping to be able to continue to build off of the Policy Academy and continue to support our communities in doing some really great things in terms of mental health and juvenile justice collaboration across Texas. And with that, I believe that's all I've got, so I'm going to turn it back over to Denise for questions.
Great. Thank you, Tegan. One question we just received is a request for that survey, and I believe you have something in the works there. Erin, do you want to respond?
Sure, I can speak to that. So we developed a survey obviously it was based a little bit off of the Community Supports for Wraparound Index that was developed by some of our national partners, and they're happy to share it. We're getting ready to actually publish some of these results. We're going to do a round two survey after the community's gotten an opportunity to kind of engage in some of the suggestions that we gave them based on that. So while we work on that, Denise, what we can do is drop that into a PDF and send that on to you and let you guys forward it on to the people registered for this. There's no copyright on it. I mean, it's just about moving communities forward. So we're happy to share that and hope that people find it useful.
Great. Thank you, Erin. There was also a question I saw that you answered in the chat box, but there was a request for the name of the traumatic experience tool that you used. Could you just say a little bit more about that tool in case others have questions about it?
Yeah, so I meant to mention that in my speaking points, and for those of you who've done webinars, you have to understand, you probably do understand that it's probably the hardest thing I've done in a while, but you have all this information in your head and you want to share it, and if it's not on a bullet, you forget. So basically, our state and most of the states across the country that utilize a brief screening instrument anyway for kids in the juvenile justice system use the MACI-2, which stands for the Massachusetts Youth Screening Inventory, second version. There is a paper and pencil version of that as well as a web-based version of that. And the specific scale that we were referencing within that is the traumatic experiences subscale within the instrument. What's really interesting about that is that not a lot of folks pay attention to that scale because it's not actually rolled in to any warning or caution category to officially be scored to recommend a follow-up assessment. And so one of the things I highly encourage systems as they go forward is, one, to utilize that MACI. It's only a 52-question short instrument. It's been validated and tested everywhere. The last time I talked to Dr. Grisso and his staff, they were actually expanding into Europe, so I think it's a pretty good instrument. And it's not only to use it, but also to look at that traumatic experiences scale, because it has some serious significance to the way the system processes.
Great, thank you. And Roger, there was a question that regarding your partnership with the judges. I know you gave the names of those judges online, but would you just say their names again to give them some credit? And can you talk about, were they the first to the table? In what sequence did they become leaders of the charge?
Well, first of all, we have our district court judge, elected official, who is Judge Lisa Gutierrez. And she came in, I believe she's on her second term now, so we're going on 6 years with her. Before that, there was another judge by the name of Alfredo Chavez who started the actual grant application process prior to Judge Gutierrez. Judge Ligon and Judge Ainsa have been with the department many more years as juvenile court referees appointed by the Juvenile Board of El Paso County. We do have monthly meetings with the judiciary in order to bring them up to speed on all the different projects that we are working with within the department. So they are fully aware of the toolbox that they have available to themselves, and they do have a complete understanding of our assessment tools, of our biopsychosocials, of our psychiatric and psychological evaluations. And so it's the tools that they need to make appropriate decisions based on our recommendations.
Great, thank you. If nobody else has any questions, you have the contact information for these presenters. And I just want to make sure that you have the RFA grant announcement, that's on the slide now, the Systemic Care Expansion Sustainability Cooperative Agreement. As Roger mentioned, there are match requirements. They're very explicitly set forth in the grant. However, they are only $1 for every 3 federal dollars in years 1 through 3, and then it's a 1-to-1 match in year 4. We also want to make sure that if you're not receiving weekly telegrams from the TA network, so please send us your email address. There is an email there on the screen. It's soctanetwork@ssw.umaryland.edu. If you send us an email with subscribe, we'll connect you. We are going to put the recording for this webinar in the telegram that will go out next Tuesday. I also want to make sure that you understand that even if you have had a prior System of Care grant award, as long as you have never received an expansion award, you are eligible to apply. Similarly, if your state has a grant, for example, Texas talked about their state expansion award, that does not prevent counties within the state to apply for their own application, submit their own applications, as long as they weren't the named county, the named implementation site in a state award. And in case you have any other questions about the grant specifically, here's my email address on the screen. There's also contact information in the RFA itself. And in addition to that, if you follow the link, there is a short webinar, it's about 20 minutes, posted by Dr. Gary Blau. That is the webinar RFA. He gives you very specifically what they're looking for, what the reviewers will be looking for, and we highly recommend you take a look at that. And with that, I am looking. There's one question here. Can you tell me the acronym for that traumatic screen tool again? Erin, that one's yours.
Yeah, I put a response in the box. So it's the Massachusetts Youth Screening Inventory, which I called the Screaming Inventory when I first said this. So it's the Massachusetts Youth Screening Inventory, the second version, or the MACI 2.
Great, thank you. And as we said earlier, we will make sure the link for the slides goes out to all of you as well. We thank you so very much for your participation. We hope a lot of you apply for this terrific opportunity in partnership with your systems of care. If you do not know about systems of care and need more information about what they are, please also send us an email and we'll be happy to provide that information to you. So with that, I think we're going to be able to give you 20 minutes back in your busy days on a Friday, either morning if you're in Alaska or afternoon if you're on the East Coast.